I've got the incredible pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Steve Davis. I'm not going to read his whole bio because you can find that in Whova, but just briefly, Steve Davis is Senior Advisor and Interim Director of Philanthropic Partnerships at the Gates Foundation, a lecturer at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and was CEO of our member organization PATH for many years. Today, Steve will help us unpack how the world's rapid pace of change is impacting the work of global health and development. Some changes present new challenges to overcome or navigate, as you all indicated in the poll, while others present new opportunities for innovation and engagement. With that, please join me in welcoming Steve. I'll be staying on the line for our fireside chat. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great to see everybody.
It's great to see you. So, Steve, from your multiple perches, Gates, Stanford, G7 Commission, formerly PATH, WHO, McKinsey, wow, that's quite the list. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing global health and development over the next decade?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be with Global Washington, and I've been part of this journey for a long time. And so I think the founders would be proud of all the great stuff you guys are doing, and welcome, Elizabeth. It's great to have a new leader on board. And I hate to kick off this conference talking about the challenges first and foremost, but maybe given the moment we're in, it's appropriate. You know, there are a lot of swirl. I've just been for the last month between DC and Washington, Africa and Asia, and there's a lot of concern out there. And I put them in sort of three large buckets. They're not unlike the polling you just did. One is this confluence, I would say, of the growing political constraints and pressures on global health and development that are combined with the fiscal constraints. So those two are very interlocked. And frankly, I think the thing that we and many of the leaders in global health are most worried about is we really are at a point where after what some are calling the couple decades of the golden years of lots of good political support and financial support, we're seeing the numbers declining overall and projected to decline somewhat significantly. And that isn't on its own. That's because partly we're seeing more populist and nationalistic governments. You know, it's not just in the United States, although the recent election will definitely have an impact on some of this, but it's also Germany and France and other parts of the world where we're seeing pullbacks from traditional ODA and other kinds of support. But it's also combined with, you know, enormous debt burden on some of the countries that we care about the most, and other kinds of the fiscal space is just constrained. So that's going to put a lot of challenges on us in terms of where the money to do this work is going to come from, how fast we can accelerate some of the more local and entrepreneurial players to step up. How do we bring more types of resources into the work? I would say that's the Uber one. I do think there's a second one that's important to mention that actually wasn't part of the polls, but I think it is actually quite pertinent, and somewhat related, is the amount of misinformation and distrust in government, in public and health and development systems, in science. We certainly saw it during COVID. We're certainly seeing some of that already as we look at presidential appointments, and so that's a large problem that the world has to keep grappling with. And I don't think we can just sort of think of it as irrational and it will eventually go away, but we actually need to think more proactively how to counter it, how to tackle it, because frankly, without solid trust in systems that provide services in global health and development, it's very hard to accomplish our goals. And then I do think climate is an enormous piece of the puzzle now going forward. And I don't say that as like, oh, there's a climate problem, but literally the intersection between climate and ag and climate and health and climate and is really at the core of a lot of the current thinking about moving forward. And it both is a challenge, like how do we now, layer that in, but it's also an opportunity. I mean, so thinking about, can we push faster climate adapted seeds and things like that? So I think there's both, but it's definitely so money, and money, politics, and global warming, I would say, are the three things that I would put on the top of the dire list at the beginning of the hour.
Well, that's a lot for at least early here on a Tuesday morning in Seattle. But no, I mean, I think you're spot on, and thank you so much for summing that up for us. Wow, given the sober view, what keeps you personally positive, and what are some potential bright spots for you?
Yeah, look, and not just by nature kind of an optimist, but I have the good fortune of being around a lot of amazing stuff that does keep me going and very positive all the time. I mean, I would say foremost, and this is the most squishy one, but is the level of deep engagement, continued optimism, and capacity that I see is on a positive trajectory around the globe, despite all the political challenges. That I just was in both Southeast Asia and Africa, where in Kenya, where there's a lot of next generation, or in my case, next generation leaders that are stepping up and really taking on these challenges directly. Gets to your theme today, more locally, more proximate. And the amount of capacity that has been evolved and built in many of these parts of the world, now not so much in conflict and fragile states, but in many parts of the world, is enormous. And I have a great amount of faith that they really are going to figure out the problems for themselves and their countries. And there's just a lot of brilliance and energy there. I'd say the second thing that I do think that we do have an amazing pipeline of innovation. In these golden years, we've invested heavily, and I mean globally, and in the Royal, we have invested heavily in R&D and some interesting human designed, human-centered design tools that are relevant in health and development. And I think that is actually quite a positive thing. A lot of that is actually happening from this state, not just Gates, but a lot of organizations, PATH, the UW, et cetera, are coming up with incredible innovations, but more so people around the world are. And I think that provides a lot of hope. And of course, AI will fuel a lot of that in both positive and negative ways. But I think my view is net, it'll be positive. And then the final thing, I actually think there's an opportunity to use these sort of multi-crises to kind of really focus us on getting a few big things done. And I think in some ways there will be, and this is kind of a maybe finding a rose-colored glasses thing, but it will force us to prioritize. It will force us to collaborate more. It'll force us to discipline, hopefully get some discipline. So saying, okay, what really are the big things can we do? Can we, in COVID, we saw this commitment to a 100-day vaccine that now is enduring as a model that we're going to work on in future pandemic relief. We've looked at now, maybe, as I mentioned, climate is forcing us to rethink agricultural R&D. I think there's a huge opportunity in the next decade for us to really take another whack at the reduction in child mortality, which has already gone down, about 50% globally in the last 20 years. Can we do that in the next 20? I think those are the kinds of things that are quite encouraging and exciting. And so, yeah, no, I remain positive.
Anything to add? I mean, in terms of capital, you've mentioned fiscal constraints. Do you think in terms of impact investing or, more unique, innovative, blended capital models, will there be anything to watch there?
Yeah, well, that I should have added that, and it's actually where I'm spending most of my time right now, how to think about and work on bringing in more types of capital into global health and development. I mentioned co-chairing a G7 commission on that right now on the impact investing side. At the Gates Foundation, I'm currently helping redesign and lead their work with philanthropists. And I think we'll see first of all, not only unlocking more philanthropy, which is not going to be a gap filler. Like, to be clear, that doesn't even come close to what government pays for these kinds of programs around the world. But I do think, there's an enormous amount of wealth that's sitting unlocked still. We need to think more about what are the barriers to giving that away here on Giving Tuesday. So I do think there's hope in unlocking more philanthropic work. I'm meeting tomorrow in California with a whole bunch of very high net worth people to educate them on global health and development. Like, we're just trying to push really hard. How do we get more people to become fellow travelers in this work? But beyond that, there's other sources of capital that I think we haven't tapped as much as expressly. And certainly, particularly as more and more people in some parts of the world that we work in, kind of emerge out of dire poverty, which we've seen a huge amount of growth, into more middle income, lower middle income categories, then that creates opportunity for people to create companies and small businesses, et cetera, that are where a lot of these sources of opportunity for better health and development and education are going to come from. I was in the poorest wards or districts of Nairobi last week, and I know some people look at that with sort of dire views, and there's a lot of suffering there for sure, but there is so much entrepreneurialism going on there. There's so many clever innovations in the medical services and the education services. So I do think that we'll see more capital flow that way. And then, we're quite active in thinking about, to your point, how do we package these resources that what we've sort of seen is these sort of parallel tracks where people are, thinking about philanthropy here and government support here and multilateral investment banks here, and they're kind of all in their own little silos. And of course, what we need to do is figure out better mechanisms to actually leverage them, to de-risk some investments, to manage foreign exchange risk with others, to provide guarantees with others. So I hope we can get more momentum there, and I think there's quite a bit of hope for that globally.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really that's uplifting. I come from that world a bit, so it's really great to hear a little bit more about what you're thinking about and the leadership of Gates in that area. And I think that's a great segue to my next question about what you're currently doing at Gates. Would love to just hear more about that. I know you've gone back and are leading work in the philanthropic partnerships team. Could you share a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities in that work?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, no, I've had a long and complicated relationship with the Gates Foundation since before it was even founded. I was with Bill above the pizza parlor in Redmond, encouraging him to do this. And worked close with Bill in running a company a number of years ago. But look, and so have been asked a couple of different times to come in and support teams that are going through a leadership and strategic transition, and that's happened again here. The philanthropic team is very interesting and a little bit of something that not a lot of people know about. That the foundation and Bill and Melinda and Warren Buffett committed a number of years ago, 15 or so, that their work is it shouldn't only be on its own, but to try to encourage and draw in others, not only to the work of the foundation, but to philanthropy broadly. And so they set up the Giving Pledge, which was a commitment to help push more of their peer billionaires to give more of their money away in their lifetime. And now there's 250 or some of the richest families in the world that are committed to that. And that's one of the pieces that I oversee now. But we also do a huge amount of work kind of behind the scenes, kind of in the spirit of what you were earlier describing, helping encourage, educate people to think about how they might give, how might they participate in, whether it's, we are the biggest sponsor of Giving Tuesday, to make sure that, this amazing day in philanthropy works across the country and the world, but also packaging, funds for specific projects. There's like a beginnings fund for childhood early childhood development that we're partly, you know, helping shape, and many, many others. So this is kind of an interesting job to figure out, again, through the lens of how do we bring more fellow travelers into the work? How do we, into our work, but more fellow travelers just to give away more money in broadly, as well as, you know, tapping into new places, like where are some of the corporate foundations around the world doing interesting things that we could kind of partner with, where we, and I don't mean just the Gates Foundation, but people working on our issues. And then what about, to your point, investors and impact investors and others, alongside of the work we do, with traditional, public donors. The interesting part of the work is, in some ways, there's a whole portfolio of our projects and people, and it's global, and it's got a lot of different components. But it's really trying to get to what are those barriers that are keeping very, very wealthy people who have more money than they can ever use or spend, and who have an actual commitment, very clear, and many have made it very public, that they want to give most of this wealth away in their lifetime. But you know, they're struggling with it. And we all roll our eyes. I did. I was totally guilty of, like, oh, come on, how hard it could be to give away that much money. But it actually turns out there are a bunch of barriers that, first of all, as we all know, the world of global health and development is kind of unwieldy. There's lots of acronyms and players and people, and, like, okay, how do I even make sense of this, and where do I go? And second, they don't want, you know, a lot of these people don't want to spend a whole nother career doing this work. Bill's kind of an exception. Most people don't want to spend their life, in strategy meetings with PowerPoints after they've retired and made a lot of money. So you know, so then how do we make it more easy for them to trust, you know, a place that can, spend this money, effectively and appropriately? What are the sort of social context? You know, the being a very wealthy person in this society comes with great exposure, and you know, that's self-inflicted perhaps, but nonetheless, you know, it means that people feel they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. So it's a lot trickier than I actually thought. And so I'm trying to unravel that a bit and figure out how we can help them. So it's interesting work. The other piece, just I might mention, because I think it's super relevant, particularly for Washington State, is I was earlier brought in, and I have a long background in China as well, and I did my law degree in China, but I've been very much focused also on the Gates Foundation's role in China. I actually oversaw that work during COVID, which was complicated. And I'm still quite involved. And we're navigating a very complicated situation, right? The US-China relationship is tense, and it's not going to get any better. And yet, you know, there's been enormous amount of interesting partnerships on innovation, on, you know, unique science, et cetera. So continuing to figure out, can we create what I call calling safe harbors, that where, you know, bureaucrats, technocrats, scientists, activists can work together across our two countries on critical issues like food security and climate and global health. And so that's a really important thing. I don't know how well it's going to work, because the politics of US and China are very complicated.
No, but wow, super interesting, fascinating, and definitely, I mean, not something you hear about in mainstream media. So really, really interesting stuff. Thanks for sharing that. And lastly, I just want to end with a little bit more of a fun question. Any best moments that you'd like to share across your vast, you know, experience and memories?
Wow, that's kind of a hard one. You know, I first of all, I don't remember much anymore, but more likely, I've been really lucky to have had a lot of great experiences, particularly, um, you know, just again, kind of going back to being in country, working with super smart people, working on these problems, and just it's inspiring. I have to give a talk tomorrow, and I was reflecting last night on something in that talk, and I'll share with you. Is I do remember kind of a moment in, it was outside of Kakamega, Kenya, in Western Province, many number of years ago, and it was after I was when I was CEO of Path, and we were had finished up or winding up a decade-long malaria reduction program. And it was a super hot day celebrating this sort of wrap up of this program. It was, and a lot of great food and music and all that. But literally during that moment, I took the keys out of our trucks and handed them off to the county government leader, the health officer for the county government. And we were handing over the entire program, our staff, our technical activity, all of it to them to take on and do it. We'd spent that long sort of helping them build it. And now it was, handing it off. And it was a really bittersweet moment in a way, because, I had to lay off staff and go through all these hard decisions, but it was exactly what this is about. The work is about, right? Like now these guys felt totally confident. They were ready to go. That we had been building it with them, but now we were stepping back, and they were happy to have full agency, but they were very appreciative of our support. And kind of, I think that's the storyline we all have to keep in mind. And as you all talk about proximate work, and I think that's the end game for us, hopefully.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. What a story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thanks for this conversation. I think you've reminded us, and we failed to mention your book too. I mean, you're a published author. So anyone wanting to learn more about your thought leadership and your ideas for practical activism, but I think, even though this moment of change that we're all living can feel overwhelming at times, thank you for sharing those bright spots with us. And I think there's a lot of work to do, and excited to continue the conversation today and into tomorrow. So thank you so much, Steve, for being with us.
Sure. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.